you've already spoken at length about the importance or the crucial importance of a downspout filter and a filter on the tank inlet, or a screen, I should say, on the tank inlet. But for the sake of completeness, let's talk about some of the other options, some of the other commercial options that are available to rainwater harvesters when it comes to kind of pre-filtration. The first one is gutter screens. Do you have any experience with these, and what do you think about them?
Well, Michelle, I was opposed to gutter screens for a good 20 years, mainly because I felt that they weren't that effective, and there were a number of different types of self-cleaning gutters and gutter screens in the market in Australia, and they not many of them, if any of them, were very effective. And however, I'm a notoriously bad maintainer of our own rainwater harvesting system, so my family prevailed upon me to actually do something. And only this year I installed a gutter screen, but I installed a second generation gutter screen that one of our local manufacturers proved to me it was okay. So I have one now, and it's quite effective because it doesn't trap debris within the mesh, which previous ones did. And when you're trapping debris within the mesh, it decomposes on the screens, and that
it can cause issues with the roof, right? It can actually rot or move the problem up.
Yeah, well, you've got the decomposing materials on the roof or over the gutter is actually corroding the metals and materials in your gutter, which is causing a problem for your roof. But decomposing up there is also leaking decomposing materials into your rainwater supply in the gutter, which is your discoloured grey-green water and your rotten egg smell that people think is a really horrible thing in terms of health reasons. Probably not so, but it's very, very unpleasant. So the new second generation gutter screen that I've only installed 6 months ago and I'm measuring doesn't leave materials trapped on the screen. It's got a different construction, and I'm quite happy with it. So,
can you describe how it differs from a construction perspective from, the gutter screens that we've maybe more typically seen?
Its mesh is finer. It slopes away from the roof itself, so it's part of the roof slope. So what happens is materials that don't flow through into the gutter through the finer mesh by the momentum of the water flowing across the screen and in through the screen into the gutter is actually pushing materials off the roof. And the manufacturer assured me they spent a lot of time researching that. I guess the moral of the story, Michelle, is to check the types of gutter screens you're going to invest in, or so-called self-cleaning gutters was the other innovation from about 20 years ago. Check to see how they work. There's nothing on your roof that means you require zero maintenance. So even with a gutter screen, you still need to get up there and clear them from time to time. So if we just have that in mind, and maintenance will still be required, I think your gutter screens will be okay.
As for downspout filters, there's lots of different manufacturers out there. And it seems that the key things that you've noticed for successful functioning or for the best functioning is this idea of a 45-degree mesh and then a finer mesh screen located at a horizontal below the first mesh. Is there anything else?
That's the successful downspout filter or rain head that I've engaged with. So this 45-degree angled coarser mesh was originally perceived to just intercept and remove leaves and larger debris from your rainwater supply. And then there was a finer mesh that's horizontal that seemed to catch things that fell through that mesh that were smaller, obviously. What we found in our national surveys, quite surprising to us, is this device actually produced very strong improvements in rainwater quality from metals, physical parameters, and bacteria. And then we had a close, and this came out of a national survey of the whole south and east coast of Australia, and inland. So it forced us to have a closer look. So what was happening is rainwater doesn't flow as a jet in a downpipe. It flows as a circular process around the outside of the pipe. And what happens is when the rainwater hits the first coarser mesh that's on 45 degrees, it actually takes the momentum and the energy out of the flow in the downpipe. And because that sudden change of momentum and energy, the materials drop out of the water, and they're caught on the horizontal finer mesh at the bottom. So actually changing a flow, like a circular helix type flow in the downpipe, to a laminar flow as it passes through the first mesh. And because of that disruption in energy and flow characteristics, we're actually capturing a whole range of materials in those devices, and that's what we found. The other issue about them is if your design is right and they're well placed, they're easier to reach than, say, cleaning out your mesh screens that might be on your gutters on a roof. So there's an opportunity there as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've seen some suppliers promote. I've seen some suppliers promote fancier centrifugal filters and promoting these for home scale rainwater harvesting. What are your thoughts on something like this?
Rainwater harvesting is quite popular with people, particularly those who like to do it yourself, or who have an interest. And I was quite surprised last year there was a trade show as part of a larger conference, and I was invited to, and the colleague whose company that provided the gutter mesh that I tested said, I've got these things, and she called them a maelstrom, which is basically a flat circular process that sits on top of the rainwater storage. So the downpipe enters it, the water spills around in it, and then it drops out contaminants, and then the rainwater drops through the center of this device into this tank. And I said, well, it's a nice toy. Do you think you'll sell any? At the end of the trade show, this company had actually sold out their entire stock of this device, and quite surprisingly, from my home, I walk around the corner for my morning coffee, and there's one of them sitting on top of someone's house, three houses from me in my street. So they're very popular, and it's one of these luxuries with rainwater harvesting. So there's so many products for sale in the rainwater harvesting industry, and to sell the products, manufacturers say you must have, and they usually, sometimes they even have the year of regulators and say, if you don't have one of these, your water quality is not going to be so great. I think this is a good juncture, Michelle, to say there are lots of tools and Lego type cool things you could have with rainwater harvesting. Probably need to separate the essentials from the luxuries. I would say that device, even though it was astoundingly popular and complex, by the way, and expensive, is a luxury rather than a must-have. So One of the cool things we need to do in this course is to separate the luxuries from the must-haves, and separate the myths around those discussions. So is it going to make a difference? Probably. Is it something you really must have to have safe water? Probably not. But it's going to help. So if you want to use these devices, and you look after them and maintain them, because every new device you add to your system, every additional device is more maintenance you need to do and more you need to pay for. So it's a personal choice. I think the whirligig, or the maelstrom, as they call them in Australia, and what do you call it? A spiral filter? Or?
Well, I've seen one that actually the intent was to go on the downspout, but the idea was similar. It was a centrifugal-type filter, and it was going to clean your water instead of a downspout filter. But for its simplicity and very little maintenance, and its low cost, just the downspout filter and the inlet screen on the tank are the way to go.
And we've talked about this elsewhere in this course. I think there's not a lot of genuine rainwater expertise around, although enormous amount of documentation about things you should have and so on. So the centrifugal filter comes from the stormwater industry to remove gross pollutants from stormwater, or storm sewer industry that you might call it in North America. And there are so many ideas from different industries that have been applied to rainwater harvesting, and they work very well in other industries, so they've just been simply applied. And what we need to test is how essential they are, and whether or not they're a luxury or not, and think about them with clear minds in how we design our systems.
All right, and with that, let's continue on this train of thought with first flush devices. Previously, we've talked about how they do a good job of removing sediment, or having one would likely remove more sediment than not having one, but it is a trade-off, and that they require increased maintenance and could substantially reduce the amount of water that you actually harvest.
It's a good point, Michelle. When I began my PhD a long time ago, I inherited a project called Fig Tree Place, which I was working on. And the rainwater harvesting systems didn't work at Fig Tree Place. One, because there weren't many people that really knew how to design a rainwater harvesting system. There were stormwater engineers or water engineers who applied their expertise to rainwater harvesting, and it didn't work. One of those is the metrics they applied and the thinking they applied to design of the first flush device. So there was a case in point was a 4-unit block of units together with a shared roof, and it had a rainwater storage, and they designed a first flush device to go with that. And the first flush device was designed using this rule of thumb relationship between roof area and improved water quality, therefore the sizing of first flush device. There is no provenance of that relationship, even though everyone refers to it and it's written up everywhere. There's no research to show that relationship exists. And in fact, our own research in the laboratories and at Fig Tree Place 20 years ago showed there was no relationship between roof area and first flush, size of first flush device versus water quality you might get from one. So we actually found that the first flush devices were sized based on a roof area relationship. They're also sized based on a design storm approach used by stormwater engineers. And a design storm is a rare event. Rainwater harvesting operates on everyday events. They don't operate on rare rain events. So what actually happened is no water could ever enter the rainwater storage just because
It was all being first flushed.
everything was being separated in this first flush device. But here's the real trap. The design engineer designed for 2 millimeters first flush separation for every so many square meters of roof area. So he wanted to separate the first 2 millimeters of runoff from the roof of the building. In combination with traditional stormwater engineering design and water engineering design, that meant those 3 different types of assumptions in the industry meant no water could ever be harvested. So this is what we need to watch out for. So what did we find in our research? That the first 20 litres of separation from a normal household size roof, was very effective. Thereafter, there was diminishing returns. No matter how big you made the first flush device, you weren't really improving the water quality by much. And most of what you were separating is actually sediments. So you weren't having a big impact on bacteria in your rainwater, although some bacteria attaches to the sediments. But what we also found, field studies and laboratory studies, first of all, first flush is a bit of a myth, and I know that's a controversial statement. There are many flushes. Sometimes your first flush from a roof will be completely clean because of the way materials stick to roofs and the way it rains and all sorts of interplays. And sometimes it'll be the second or third flush within a single rain event will actually generate some contamination, not the first flush. So first flush is a very popular concept, particularly in the stormwater industry. Very controversial to say this. I'm not sure how well it applies to rainwater harvesting. So the final thing we found in our field surveys all around the country is first flush devices were notoriously not maintained, and therefore they don't work. Because what happens when they're not maintained?
I can speak to experience with the lack of maintenance of my first flush diverter.
So Michelle, you'd find the water in the first flush device would become almost toxic because it just keeps sitting there, and the materials in it would be decomposing. So if the device stays full.
And the little port on the bottom that's supposed to allow for a slow release would always plug. It would always plug. So.
Yeah, and the battle for the early first flush designers is to find the small enough hole to have such a slow leak that the first flush wasn't separating too much rainwater and it would work properly. The reality is, the smaller you make that plug hole, the greater chance of it being blocked.
Well, and that's an interesting point in that, we have an asphalt roof, and so, which is notorious for, with the rainwater in both the downspout filter and the first flush is kind of this sediment that to me is from the asphalt roof. And I suspect if you had a metal roof, you might not have the same kind of plugging issues as I had in my first flush diverter.
You may not, but the atmosphere contains dust and all sorts of things, which people are just starting to discover. We were publishing on this a few years back now, 20 years ago, that, around in the wind and the air currents, there's sediments and debris and leaves. We get leaves on in the gutters of houses where trees are nowhere near them because the leaves just blow onto them from the nearest park or something like that. So, but in the case of asphalt, you would have, unless it was sealed asphalt, you would have materials leaching out of the asphalt coating of your roof. So you'd be directly seeing that in the first flush device. And therefore, it's doing its job, provided you're maintaining your first flush device.
So knowing all of that, when would you include one in the design of a rainwater system?
We don't have one on our house, mainly because of the research we did early on them, and we're not convinced they're such a great idea. If you've got a good rainwater treatment train, which we're talking about in this course, and if you have, you're looking after your roof downpipe process properly, you may not actually need a first flush device. So in our case, we've got a very good leaf diverter with the two screens, the diagonal one and the finer horizontal screen, and it's doing a fantastic job. We were tempted to put a first flush device in the end. We've not used one. However, a small first flush device, properly maintained, will certainly take some of the sediments out of your rainwater supply. If you only put in a first flush device and you don't have a leaf diverter, you're probably defeating the purpose. And roof runoff has multiple flushes, not just a first flush. So you want something that operates continuously through the process. So your filter on the downpipe, your leaf diverter, as we call them, or you call them downspout filters, is working all through rain events. Whereas your first flush device will only work at the start of a rain event, provided you've maintained it. So yes, by all means put one in, because it provides a valuable service, but it will only provide a service for the first part of your rain event if you maintain it.
If you maintain it. And then if you do want to put one in, there's a table in the book, table 5.2, which shows typically the way you build these is you buy the components. It's a little ball that floats up and down some length of pipe that you have to cut and buy. And for the pipe length and the diameter of pipe you're using, it shows you or I should say for the diameter of pipe you want, it shows you what length will give you the 20 liters of volume approximately. So that's to help you stay under that 20 liter number that Peter mentioned earlier.
I guess the other trap is I'm driving through 10 years ago, I was driving through housing estates in Australia where people had leaf diverters and first flush devices on every downpipe. Now, if you do that, you will not harvest any rainwater.
Because of the leaf diverter or because of the downspout? Or because of the first flush?
Because of the first flush device.
Because of the first flush, yeah.
So, and you're creating a substantial maintenance problem. You should be collecting the downpipes together, have one entry into your storage, and your first flush device should be there just before your rainwater storage. Similarly, if you can manage it, you should only have one leaf diverter as well. Sometimes you have to have more than one, but having one only is a really good approach. So
that's a really good point. Okay, thanks.